and the future of the Union following our exchanges in Tallinn. First of all, I would like to remind you that the main topic of discussion yesterday with the President of the European Parliament was European solidarity following the terrible fires which have affected Portugal and Spain recently. We also discussed the terrible climate events which have affected Ireland and several Baltic states. And I'd like to repeat that during these discussions, we have collectively defended the idea of a European civil protection force. This idea, which had been proposed by a report by Michel Barnier a few years ago, had been abandoned. And now several countries are now interested in reviving this initiative, and it is supported by the Commission and the European Parliament. Mr. Tajani and Juncker have actively promoted this idea, and the Commission will submit a concrete proposal within a month. So beyond the great collective solidarity expressed, this Europe that will protect people, which we have been promoting since last month, has concrete practical results, and I hope that this will continue in the future. Yesterday afternoon, the session was mainly dedicated to the defense of migration and of digitalization. Regarding defense, we have acknowledged the progress made since the European Council in June to put in place structural cooperation in the field of defense. Following the June talk, we came to some decisions with Germany and other partners, and by the end of the year, structural, permanent cooperation will be in place. At the same time, we have to progress on the European Defence Fund to pool funds for research and hardware and equipment, and we hope that projects will be financed in 2019 by this fund. So this cooperation has improved very actively since June. We now need to implement the decisions taken so that the fund becomes reality by the end of the year. As regards migration, we reasserted our commitment to managing the migration crisis in all its dimensions, from the countries of origin to the border countries. France will triple its contributions to the Fund for Africa by the end of the year. I have reasserted France's commitment to the Sahel region, and we already are highly committed financially and militarily, which of course contributes to solving this crisis, and the commitment in 2018-2019 of French forces in response to the call made by the Commission a few weeks ago. We then discussed the strategy we need to have regarding migratory flows from Iraq, from Syria, or from Africa. I have insisted on the fact that we need to have a fully integrated approach, not only to have a very determined approach. We discussed this a lot regarding Libya. Libya is a transit country, a key transit country in the Central European Mediterranean area, but also with other transit and countries of origin. This is the approach we initiated last June in Paris, which we have continued with the African Union, and it is also the approach that we have implemented in the Sahel region and with the Alliance for the Sahel. That's why I asked that the G5 Sahel and the Alliance should be mentioned in the reference documents for the work of the Commission and of the Council, and the entire European Union should be fully involved in this progress. We also talked in this framework about the reform of the right to asylum. We hope to have an agreement in the first half of 2018. Everybody agrees that today it is necessary to finalize the agreements, to get rid of internal dysfunctions which make it more difficult to manage the migratory problem. I will come back in more detail later to all these points. We continued our exchanges on the digital issue, which is key to the sovereignty and competitiveness of Europe. We reminded everybody of the need. We discussed of what we discuss in Tallinn, to have a consistent approach to digitization. Digitization in all European countries calls for a genuine strategy of transformation and investment to encourage the emergence of digital champions, because our citizens will also need to higher qualifications, better qualifications. So we need to invest in training for this purpose. We must lay a level playing field for free and fair competition in the digital field. The managers of digital organizations should accept a just tax, because all this training and transformation will require funding, and we need to get the major economic players in the digital field who benefit from this transformation without paying for them to contribute. And finally, we need to encourage security in cyberspace to protect everybody from cyber terrorism, cyber attacks. These principles were discussed yet again yesterday, and we particularly insisted on the importance for Europe of being a leader in innovation and in regulation in order to foster confidence, respect for privacy of data. So our conclusions underlined the need to develop as quickly as possible the G5, to launch new initiatives for financing innovation, and we have progressed regarding the creation of a European agency to police digitization with the support of Germany and other parts. Regarding regulation, we are in favor of free movement of data and data flows, protecting intellectual property, but we also encourage the Commission to submit rules to enhance transparency of practices by platforms. Regarding taxation, we need to continue discussing this. There are some differences of interest in this regard. It is important to have as clear as a debate as possible, and a frank debate as possible. There is a consensus of opinion today, as discussed in Tallinn. We need to progress regarding taxation. The European Commission is promoting this. The ministers of the economy and finance have taken initiatives in this. It's necessary for the reasons I've already mentioned. We have a number of common goods which the players and the giant players of the digital field must contribute to this. So several member states have expressed the wish that this work should be part of and guided by the debates we will have within the OECD, and that these OECD debates will inspire Europe-wide solutions. I'm very much in favor of the OECD playing a role. It has played a great role in fighting against tax evasion, tax avoidance. So I'm in favor of this. France will be, next year, will be chairing the OECD and will make sure this issue is on the agenda. We also reasserted our will, our determination to define a European doctrine. We've asked the Commission from the beginning of 2018 to shed light, to inform the Council on the work it will have to do on this issue of taxation of the digital sector. There is a consensus on the need to move forward. There are differences of views which reflect the different economic models of member states. What is important is to say that it is possible to combine our European competitiveness and our ability to create taxation of the digital sector if we manage to draw up to achieve a collective consensus. The main players in the digital sector are in a field where competition is not fair, because we have very different models within the European Union. So we must work on this in the next few months. And yesterday we had the first discussions, which were very honest and very direct amongst ourselves. During our dinner, we discussed informally the international situation regarding Iran. The European Council, following a debate led by Federica Mogherini, we confirmed Europe's attachment for the nuclear deal with Iran and its implementation. We had an exchange of views with Chancellor Merkel and Prime Minister May. Our three countries will be working very closely together on the Iran issue. Our determination is to do everything we can to ensure that the July 2015 agreement is maintained. Yesterday morning, I spoke to the Director General of the International Energy Association, who reported on the most recent assessments and inspections in Iran, and I'd like to inform our partners and the decision makers, the Congress, the US Congress, of the inspection reports by the International Energy Association, who have monitored the compliance of Iran with the agreement. I also insisted on the European insistence on our ability to enforce all the terms of the agreement, to open up economic relations with Iran, and not to there should not be any extraterritorial pressure on the part of the United States should it finally oppose the maintenance of this agreement. We have decided to work actively in collaboration with the United States to grant, to make all the procedures ensure the pursuit of this agreement. I have expressed my determination to open up discussions with Iran on their ballistic activities and on Iran's regional involvement in several countries, and I think there is a strong consensus around the table on this issue. We also discussed North Korea, showing the importance of the agreement with Iran. North Korea illustrates perfectly the consequences of what might happen if there is a breakdown, when a breakdown occurs in relations. The European Council adopted very firm positions in line with France's position in the Security Council of the UN, and after the adoption of new European sanctions last Monday. We then had a very important discussion on Turkey. We agreed that we must avoid a breakdown in relations with Turkey and maintain a demanding but firm dialogue with Turkey. The content of the relations between Europe and Turkey depends on what happens in Turkey. There are concerns regarding the evolution of the situation in Turkey, and it is obvious that our relations with Turkey are important to face certain challenges, such as the flows of migrations and the fight against terrorism. We also took stock of the situation regarding the Brexit in the presence of Theresa May, who was able to express her views, and also on trade. I wish to clarify the French position regarding trade, remind everybody, as I did in my speech to the Sorbonne, the need for a balanced policy between openness and protectionism to foster trust and confidence in our trade relations. We have an internal challenge to restore the trust of our public opinions in trade deals. We have seen that this is not the case. And the external challenge is to have a growth agenda and to be able, at a time when the United States are trending towards isolationism, we want to develop strategic trade relations with different regions in the world. In this framework, I underlined the need for reform of our European trade policy based on trade deals, based on equity and reciprocity. I will be very vigilant. In each agreement, trade agreement, the principle of reciprocity must be maintained, so that we want stronger environmental demands, and that they should be respected in the framework of these agreements, and that social criteria should also be taken into account in trade negotiations. So this reform of our trade policy, as expressed by President Juncker, must lead to greater transparency of negotiations and a strict implementation of trade rules, sanctioning dumping and disloyal trade practices. President Juncker spoke on this question, reminding us of the Commission's strong commitment and personal commitment in favor of this policy. And in the next few weeks, we will have opportunities to have a broad discussion based on the approach expressed by President Juncker on our trade policy. This morning, we discussed, the 27 member states discussed Brexit again, and our message is very simple. We are all delighted at the unity of method and representation by the EU with a structured agenda and a single representative. So we all reconfirm the methodology. We will discuss all the parameters of Phase 1, notably the 3 structural parameters, which the mandate for negotiation has been given to Michel Barnier, and to preserve a single channel of discussion through Michel Barnier. We recognize the overtures made by Theresa May in recent weeks. In her Florence speech and in other public speeches, we confirmed our determination to undertake a second phase of discussions, but all of this must be done in order, respecting the determination, our unity, to have a very clear roadmap regarding the next phases. Michel Barnier's report on the ongoing negotiations highlighted the fact that these negotiations had progressed, but a lot of effort still needs to be made financially by the United Kingdom. Today, we are a long way away from having a clear view of the UK's financial commitments, as Prime Minister May has promised in her Florence. If we want to be sure nobody will pay more or receive less. We want to make sure that the UK will honour all its commitments as a member of the European Union. Today, I would say that we are far from having reached a clear view of the financial commitments in order to begin Phase 2 of the negotiations. May I remind you of our determination, all the work that remains to be done. Before this discussion, with 28 member states, we had an informal discussion on the agenda of the heads of state and government and the project for reforming the European Union. I would have liked to have had this informal discussion in Tallinn, as organized by the Prime Minister of Estonia. As a result of this dinner, President Tusk committed to submit an agenda. He has had several bilateral discussions ever since then, and he submitted his agenda today. I'm very pleased that we can preserve the momentum that was launched a few weeks ago to go ahead, to move ahead, and to reform Europe. What is at stake today, what is proposed by President Tusk with the support of President Juncker and the support, of course, of the main member states? Chancellor Merkel reminded us that we are all aligned. We must progress in the months to come with the several directions. First of all, we must foster greater union. We had a meeting with 28 member states, and we must continue to do so, to have this discussion all together. But we must also talk about our ambitions, about our aims. All too often, in order to maintain unity, we have lowered our aims, lowered our ambitions. So the aim of the discussions on reforming the EU must not be to agree on everything, but to accept that those who are the most ambitious can move forward, leaving the doors and the windows open for other member states to join us when they wish to follow suit. So I clarified this methodology. We don't want to define if ambition allows us to go ahead, as like with the Eurozone and Schengen, it shows that it is possible. If we only seek the greatest common denominator, the EU will not progress. So we must link union and high ambition. The innovation, we must prepare in a concerted way each of our monthly meetings. There will be an exchange of documents, strategic documents, not technical documents, which will allow us to agree on the main lines of our strategy. Month after month, we must try to agree not on communiques, on press statements, but on principles. We must highlight our agreements and our disagreements. It's of fundamental importance if we wish Europe to progress, Since last year, I haven't come here today to tell you I have won and such a state has lost out. On digital issues, we have agreements and disagreements. Some states want to move forward more quickly than others. A decision will be made sooner or later, but we have discussed this frankly, and we must do this on all issues. And in the months to come, we must highlight the strategic options and then make a decision. If we remain ambiguous, if we say I won and the others lost, that will not enable us to progress. There will be a cacophony which will confirm in the minds of our citizens that Europe has become bureaucratic and no longer has a vision. I want to link our vision and practical action, and the agenda submitted by President Tusk will allow us to move in that direction. So every month we will prepare strategic and clear documents, we'll have honest discussions, and we'll see in which areas we can progress with 28 member states, and what practical legal decision, legislative decision. But in the field of migration, it may be difficult, but in defense, it should be easier. And on other issues can be followed later, can be raised later. If we can move together with 27 member states, or perhaps we should accept that some member states are willing to move forward more quickly than others, with the hope of ultimate convergence. That is the Europe I wish to foster, and I think this morning's discussion led to an agreement on this methodology in order to sustain this ambitious agenda. By next summer, I hope we will have made decisions on these strategic issues which will allow us to move forward and agree on democratic conventions and have a clear framework for the next European elections. That is how we can democratically and reasonably approach the European elections with our fellow citizens. Several member states, Germany, Finland, and others have shown an interest in democratic conventions, democratic agreements on a voluntary basis, and they will be making submissions on the methodology, and the EU Commission is willing to support this. As I said yesterday, finally, on the occasion of this European Council, I confirm France's attachment to European symbols, such as its flag and its anthem. And France is willing, wants to be part of a stronger Europe. I've had also some bilateral discussions, particularly with the Prime Minister Rajoy. On the one hand, I reasserted France's full support for Spain in the current situation, and we also discussed and worked together on a very important point on the agenda to protect Europe, that is of seconded workers. So I wished to report to you on these exchanges which we've had over these 2 days, to say that in my view, regarding the Europe that protects and the Europe that is ambitious and wishes to move forward, we have made great progress. I'm now willing to answer some of your questions. Good morning, Mr. President of Reuters agency. Have you learned anything from Mrs. May regarding the financial settlement? Is she willing to go beyond 20 billion euros? And will this settlement only be part of the final definitive agreement on the Brexit? So, how can we imagine that we will achieve a quick agreement with her, given that she's politically weak? The transition to phase 2 of the negotiation doesn't depend on me. It depends on solving the 3 issues discussed in phase 1, and that is in the hands of Theresa May. The British Prime Minister, as I have said, has shown signs of opening regarding the finance, the transition period, and the rights of citizens. But on these issues, there still are problems which have to be solved. It is Mr. Michel Barnier's responsibility to express our views in this regard. On the financial issue, what I can say is that it is necessary not only to deal with the UK's contribution to the budgets of 2019 and 2020, but also to take into account all the commitments that the UK has made until 2020. When you have a comprehensive approach to the UK's financial commitments, which must be rigorously studied, which must be, and to understand our collective interest, and also the commitments made by Mrs. May in the Florence speech. Today, we haven't done half the journey. We still have more than half the journey to cover. So quite obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done, and I hope that this will be done in a serene and calm way, and I wish to repeat that for several weeks there is goodwill on the part of the British, which is quite obvious, quite manifest, but we will have a lot of progress to make in the next few weeks if we wish to, or when we can approach the second phase. I have understood that you're looking for a deal on Brexit, but what about the threat of a no-deal scenario? Are you taking the threat of a no-deal scenario seriously? Regarding the Brexit, has sufficient progress? How much will sufficient progress cost? On the first point, I think that there is one negotiator on the British side under the political authority of Theresa May. At no moment did Mrs. May evoke the no-deal option. There are rumors, there is some bluffing going on the part of some minor spectators, people who are on the sidelines of the negotiations, but that is a part of media reality today. But in no case is it today part of the discussion. The discussions are moving forward at a quicker pace in recent weeks, but the goal of all the negotiators is to arrive at an agreement on the first phase. Failing an agreement on phase one, we will not move on to phase two. And it is mainly up to the UK. It's mainly the UK that will lose out in this regard because of its strong dependence on the European Union and regarding its commitments to the European Union. In this document, it is not for us to give an exact figure regarding the divorce bill. It is up to Michel Barnier to negotiate on this issue on our behalf. Good morning, Mr. President. You met with some resistance regarding trade during the summit and the taxation of the giants of the digital sector. Is your energy running out in this regard, or are you, at what moment will you decide to confront, to stop looking for a consensus? When are you going to reach the moment where you have to come to hard decisions? I'd like to reassure you I have as much energy as ever before, and I will continue. But for this energy to produce positive effects, it must take reality into account. Today we are 28, tomorrow we'll be 27 member states. It is normal that our energy should meet with resistance. In reality, if you know your physics, energy often meets with resistance. Otherwise, you become a mobile on a cushion of air. And physical mechanics teach us that a mobile on a cushion of air gets nowhere. Resistance is what structures your way forward. There are legitimate reasons for resistance. There are divergences of views, there are divergences of interests, and that's normal. On the other hand, my ambition for Europe, which I share with many other member states, and primarily with Germany, beyond what we need to solve on a day-to-day basis, as we have done regarding defense, and as I hope we will be able to do regarding seconded workers, we must also rebuild more radical medium-term ambitions. And I think we are capable of doing that, and our fellow citizens want this. And this will restore confidence in the European project. Regarding trade, we didn't talk about trade yesterday. So the Jean-Claude Juncker's speech supported what I had said. We have some differences of opinion, but I don't share the traditional French position in this regard. But I reminded the importance of methodology, as I said in my Sorbonne speech, which are very close to what the President of the Commission mentioned in his speech on the state of the European Union. So we will continue discussions in the next few weeks, and by the end of the year or by the beginning of next year, agreements should emerge or disagreements will emerge. Regarding the digital issue, we have progressed a lot regarding the situation 6 months ago, and the debates in Tallinn were very fruitful in this regard. And we've progressed a lot thanks to the work of the Commission and thanks to the work done by our Ministers of Economy and Finance. During the summer, we came up with concrete proposals to tax the main players in the digital sector. 1 year ago, nobody thought that these proposals would be reasonably submitted. So the summer has seen great progress in this area. I am in favor of taxing the digital sector, but it's only one aspect of the digital issue. We have to bear our common interests in mind, and I'm sure that if we look at that, we can tax the players. This will not be detrimental to Europe. Today, there are giant players in the digital who don't pay any corporate tax or VAT in many European countries because their tax organization allows them to play off different member states and to play also with tax havens. So if we have a common approach in Europe to taxation, I don't think Google, Facebook will stop working in Europe or will stop operating in Europe and with our businesses the day we create a common taxation system. What is true is that some member states may, in the short term, marginally lose out, because their business model is based on the differences between us instead of optimization between us. So taxing digital will not lead to a disappearance of the big players in the digital sector. So we have a decision to make. If we play collectively, we can influence the course of events. Otherwise, we will not. We don't want the taxation to be excessive. Some states have participated in optimizing the digital market. So the states that are in that situation don't want us to move forward. We must. There will be no losers and winners in this area. The starting point of our discussion is this. It's the fruit of our past histories. So we must adopt an honest approach. The OECD is a good framework for moving forward, but we must also come up with a European strategy. So we've had a frank discussion on this, and we need for the Commission to shed light on this. The Commission will lead our initiatives in this regard. We will also take into account the discussions within the OECD, and by next spring, things should be clarified. I think we need to avoid ambiguity. The worst thing of all is ambiguity. When there is ambiguity regarding strategy and interests and policies, then there are long, time-consuming, technical debates which mask the ambiguities, and conclusions are completely incomprehensible, and nobody wins in that situation. So the method I have proposed since last May, I'm not saying that France has a solution to every problem. We have a vision which I have set out. You may agree with it or not, but the value of this vision is that it is clear, and very humbly, I say the things have already been done, some progress has been made, we've had some failures, but I think it's important to sustain the momentum in the months months to come, because collectively we have a lot to gain from clarity and momentum. So on seconded workers, for example, I consider that the work that has been done has changed the whole issue, and in the weeks to come, what are we talking about in this regard? It was one of the key issues used by the Front National in the French presidential campaign. There are no controls over seconded workers or posted workers. We don't look at the real conditions and the costs, the disloyal competition of posted workers compared with national domestic workers. And there is no cooperation between states, there are no time limits. So we have posted workers in our country, and we think the system has to be improved. The populists take advantage of the lack of regulation in Europe. So the Commission proposed that we should progress. 11 countries expressed their reservations. And in June, I said we need to move forward on this issue. We proposed something much more ambitious than the compromise which was on the table, and I hope that in the next few days and weeks we will arrive at an agreement to limit seconded or posted work to 12 months, to come up with a real strategy that will get rid of postbox, letterbox companies and will reinforce the legality of work. And this shows that when we invest energy, in spite of the resistance we meet with, we can manage to get results. And we must give up simplistic views. There is no East-West war. I looked for allies in Eastern Europe when we went to Romania, when we went to Bulgaria, when we went to Salzburg. We had very rich discussions with the Czechs and the Slovaks to show them we can come to an agreement with all member states. When you put a lot of energy and clarity and you have strategic political discussions, you can find agreements, and this is not detrimental to the interests of all the participants.